Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence. This month's episode features a conversation on church staffing structures with Advantage team member Mark Stuenzi and Amy Anderson of the Unstuck Group.
We are honored to have Amy Anderson join us for this workshop today. Amy is the Director of Consulting at the Unstuck Group. And I thought it would be good to hear from Amy because the Unstuck Group works with dozens of churches every year, and they've seen just about everything when it comes to structure and staffing. Amy, how many churches has the Unstuck Group consulted with over the years? It's north of 600 now, isn't it?
It is. I think when we count, we only count the churches that we actually were on the ground with and went through the full Unstuck process. And I think that's at about 675 now. But then, of course, if you add in the churches we've worked with through our cohorts over the years and all of that, it's much larger. But yeah, 675 unique churches.
That's awesome. The church I led in Scranton was one of those churches, by the way. I think that was about 8 years ago, and your input was a game changer in that season of our church's life. And I think you have a long-term connection with LCBC Church that began back in your days as a staff member at Eagle Brook. Isn't that the case?
That's right. Yeah, we met the team back in the early 2000s. We ended up going to Leadership Network for a multi-site cohort. And when churches gather, probably like your group today, there are certain people that you connect with. You just have something in common with. And yeah, the LCBC team, we had some great laughs. We ended up coming out to the church and spending some time with the team. Back in the day, we laughed at all the names of the towns in your great state as we made our way to you. And then, of course, your visit was in 2016. And I can still remember parts of the message you preached when I did the Secret Shopper. You were in James 4 and you had a mist that you were, trying to teach about how fast life goes. And I still remember that today.
That's very encouraging to hear. I'm not sure how many of our Parker Hill attenders would remember, but you do. That's awesome, Amy. Thank you.
Yep.
And thanks for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time. Let me just give you a few questions and talk to us about staffing and structure. So most of the churches attending this workshop are at the point where they feel like they may need to make some changes in their staff structure. What are the most important things they need to keep in mind when they're evaluating or possibly rewriting their staff structure, their organizational chart?
Sure. There's a lot of things. By the way, I probably work with 36 churches a year on staffing and structure alone.
Oh.
So I think I have seen it all. I've been around it all. And some of the things I'm going to share, I've also seen proven out over the years. So my recommendations are really built on the things that I've seen work and really help churches get unstuck in the staffing area. And the people that you're meeting with, staffing, restructuring, it's at the top of a lot of people's minds right now. There are obviously some churches that are just still bloated from COVID. They didn't make the changes and their ratios, attendee to staff ratios are really low. Other churches, they're growing. I mean, that's actually our tribe at Unstuck, the churches we connect with. They're all dealing with growth challenges now. And of course, in staffing structure, as they're getting a new vision or new strategies, they're restructuring around that. So all of you in the room, you're normal. And I hope that there is a nugget or two today that would really help you all think through what do we need to do. But the first thing I would say, what you need to consider is you want to think strategy first, then structure, and then people when you're going through a reorg. In other words, you want to go, where is God calling us to go? And what does success look like? If you have your 12-month organizational goals, and what are the main strategies we're going to double down on with that? After you figure out where you're going, what success looks like, then we want to identify what's the right structure to support that. And those are boxes, those are roles, those are people lists at that point, because we don't want to think about people until that third spot. Because if we don't do it that way, most people do it the other direction. Instead of going, where are we going? How should we structure? Who are the right leaders? They go, who do we have? How can we organize now? What can we do? So you want to go strategy, structure, people when you're doing it. Another thing you want to think about with your structure is you want to think through having clear ministry lanes. And I say that because obviously You want to build it around your strategies, your core ministry strategies around those responsibilities. But it's amazing how many times we actually kind of shuffle the deck and we start to, and it often is when we structure around people, like, right, well, that person could never work for that person. That person can't get promoted above that person. And we start to, again, we mix it up. I'll give you an example of that in one of our org charts here. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. So this is an example. Um, Now, obviously, this has many different challenges as well with having so many direct reports. Maybe this isn't actually the best example. Let me see if I can grab this one. So in this org chart, you can see we've got an executive pastor of ministry, an executive pastor of operations, and a group like life pastor. Here, guest experience, facilities, family high school, creative arts, hair, Spanish. Anyways, you can see that this has been built around people. This has not been built in a organized manner. I mean, if you just look here, group life, care, guest experience, which is like serving, all of those really revolve around the next steps that we want people to take. After they've come to the weekend service or connected with us. But by having leaders kind of spread out like this, what happens when we don't organize the ministry is that those leaders end up starting to compete, right? They compete for volunteers, they compete for announcements, they compete for budget. And when we group them all though under one leader, like someone like a next steps director, discipleship director, then you've got that one person, that one leader who is thinking about all of those next steps and making sure they actually complement and work together because it's not a linear process how people get discipled, but we don't want different leaders managing different aspects of that. So clear ministry lanes. The second concept I would say is that you have to have the right leaders in those seats in the top of the org chart. And I say leaders, you really need multiplying, equipping leaders, people who are leaders of leaders in those spots. If we don't get that right, anyone who's on their team, it's not going to go right. So, some of the things that we did, and we did this with you at Parker Hill, we went through an assessment first of just what was the right structure. But then when we did look at the people, there's three things that we looked at. One was just their natural strengths. We used DISC at the time, or leading from your strengths. And that's good information to understand kind of the natural gifts and wiring of the leaders that you're putting in place. Not only just to get to know them, but to actually see, do we have a good level of diversity amongst our leadership team? So that assessment, we also look at character, chemistry, and competence, which I think you're going to be talking about later in your day. I also throw the fourth C of culture in there. Just what is their competency level? How's their character? How's their chemistry with the rest of the team? And then, of course, their alignment to our culture. And then the third thing we assessed, if you remember, was just leadership capacity. So, what level are they leading at today? And do they have the leadership potential to lead at a high level? Because sometimes we take a risk on someone, right? We think she's ready for the next step or he's ready. But if we don't believe they have that potential, you don't want to put those in there. So, strategy, structure, people, clear ministry lanes, get the right leaders in the right seat. Those are the top three. And then the last one I would say is really about an appropriate span of care. I don't know what yours is, Mark. For me, I can probably lead 4 or 5 people pretty well. But if I get beyond that, I start checking boxes. I'm not really discipling and getting into a level of relationship with my employee that I would desire. Tony often says to me, that's the founder of the Unstuck Group. He's like, Amy, if I don't know how to pray for you, then I'm not doing my job well. And I kind of concur with that. So, it'll vary from person to person. But honestly, when you start to get past 6 direct reports, I think the effectiveness, unless you're extraordinary, starts to dissipate some.
Yeah,
Because now,
I found as a senior pastor, my maximum was 4 because it took so much of my time to prepare for teaching every week, plus leading staff meetings, trying to cast vision for the church, trying to think ahead and all of that, that I felt like 4 was the maximum for me. Um,
yep.
that may just be me, but I do think probably not much more than that for any lead pastor.
For most lead pastors, 4 would certainly be the lid. Most senior pastors, eventually, as the church grows, gets to 1 direct report, maybe 2 direct reports.
Yeah.
But their primary responsibility is not management.
No.
They've got other things that lead pastors need to spend time on.
So you would
I just
say
know.
even within the rest of the organizational chart, have a small span of care, maybe up to 6 people for any employee. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Okay.
Because remember, not only are you're leading those leaders, so you need to invest in them, raise them up to their potential, and then hopefully they're leading volunteer leaders who are leading volunteers, et cetera. So the less effective you are, you can imagine how that trickles down through the organization if span of care gets
Yeah.
too large. And I will say this: you also, if you're a lead pastor and you feel like your direct report is too broad, don't just pass 9 direct reports down to an executive pastor. That's too many for him or her as well. So we
Yeah.
want to think kind of strategically. A couple things I'd add to the structure recommendations, and this is probably obvious, but um, everyone should report up to that on the team, should report up to the senior leadership team. So we shouldn't have any floaters around in different places or reporting into committees. Everyone should roll up to the senior leadership team who rolls up to the lead pastor. Um, Also, when I coach churches, just ensuring that you have a leader over your reach strategies, like who's going to lie awake at night if we aren't reaching new people, if we aren't seeing numerical growth, right? That was my job at Eagle Brook. When our attendance went flat or something like that, uh, I didn't teach a message. I wasn't ushering, but I was the leader responsible. So I was the one to open up the hood and see what is wrong. What's Has our invite culture cooled off? Is our teaching not relevant? Does something need to change? So someone who is really over your reach strategies to reach new people. And then who's the leader over your discipleship strategies? And again, a leader who really owns it overall and leads the people who are a part of that. What I find is that most churches do have a leader over discipleship, but they've kind of left it a little nebulous as to who's actually owning the growth piece. And so that's another tidbit I would throw into restructure is, does someone actually have that responsibility? We joke on the podcast all the time. This is a terrible joke. um, what's the quickest way to kill a dog? It's give 8 people the responsibility to feed it, right? Everyone thinks someone else is doing it. So that's the point there. And then
Yeah.
the third thing that you want to keep in mind in a restructure. Now, you know, we were a multi-site church, LCBC, multi-site church. If the leaders in the room are thinking multi-sites in their future, you really want to think through the scalability. You want to think through a few iterations. Like what would like if we doubled in size and we had 4 locations, how would we be structured? And keep that destination in mind as you're setting the first restructure so that you aren't reshuffling the deck with every campus launch, but you're building towards a destination.
Good. And I've heard Unstuck say that you should at least revisit the staff structure about every 18 to 24 months, evaluate it, and make sure it's still working. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely would. In fact, the hardest restructure is often the one where you do it because you haven't done it in a really long time.
Yeah.
But you want to build off of that to make it feel a little normal. Because honestly, at the end of the day, how you're structured is actually one of your ministry strategies.
Yeah.
And so if you're casting new vision, if you're changing some of your ministry approaches, a restructure should be, in place during that time because you can't put new wine in old wineskin. How did I say
Yep.
that right? Can't
Yep.
put new wine in old wineskins because people will tend to behave like they always have behaved. So this restructure will create a disruption that brings clarity to roles and responsibilities and what they're to do.
So, what are some of the signs that a church may need to restructure? Signs that the current structure isn't functioning the way that it should.
Mm.
How do you know?
Yeah, there's lots of symptoms. One would be that we keep adding responsibilities to existing roles. When we're doing something new, we keep piling more and more responsibilities on the people who are actually able to get stuff done. So instead of maybe thinking about where those responsibilities should lie and how we should organize, those are like new ministry strategies, right? So, like when COVID hit and everyone went online and all this, I think people's jobs just got added to. We really didn't take a step back and say, how are we going to lead this? So, that would be one. Sometimes, especially in multi-site environments, people don't really know who they really report to because they're in a matrix. So when reporting structure begins to feel unclear, when who gets to make what decision is starting to get really unclear, those are some symptoms that we've got something funky going on. What we just referenced, when span of care starts to get too broad, we have a problem. Um, I think if there's anything else. No, I think I would just reiterate that, hopefully every church is doing planning every year. They're pausing, they're getting out of the whirlwind, and they're talking about what does this next year look like. I think you always want to check your structure at that point to say, are we aligned to actually, get there? I noticed in the agenda later on, you're going to be talking about, appropriate FTEs and
Yeah.
things like that. But I think another thing that actually reflects that maybe something's wrong with our structure is when we begin to get overstaffed. When we get overstaffed, there's three reasons for it generally. One is we're just doing too much ministry. We haven't pruned for a long time, and so we've gotten wider, and then we start hiring people to do those things. The second reason would be that we have people on our team that aren't leaders. They don't have a high enough leadership capacity. This is particularly important in the discipleship areas like groups and serving and care and prayer and outreach. Um, and I say that, and also family ministries, birth through 18, because we do need specialists on our team in the weekend areas, in the operational areas. We don't need those all filled with multiplying, equipping leaders, but we do need it there because at the end of the day, our job is to be giving that ministry away to the body. So overstaffing is when we hired people who are actually doing ministry. In essence, we hired roles that should be filled by volunteers instead of hiring those higher level leaders. And the third reason is both of that's going on. We have too much ministry and we have too many doers on the team. So if you're overstaffed, and what Unstuck recommends is one full-time equivalent for every 75 people that attend the church, and not like your membership, but like what's your average weekly attendance? One FTE for every 75. So if you find you're significantly lower than that, part of it could be the wrong leaders in the wrong seats within your structure.
Okay. So you've got a church that maybe overstaffed. There's some tension around how decisions get made. There's a lot of red tape, and it takes a lot of
Mhm,
time to make decisions. The org chart has too big a span of care. They see some of these
mhm.
symptoms. They sit down, they say, we're going to restructure. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you guys have seen churches make when they go into this reorganizing, restructuring process?
Yeah. Um, well, we said a couple of them. One of them is they go, "Who do we have? And
Mhm.
now how do we structure around those people?" And in that, they also refuse maybe to make changes based on people, meaning, they don't remove that person from leadership, or they too many people are too right, we're used to reporting to you, Mark, and so they don't want to change anything. So if they come in with a reluctance to change, that's going to be a big mistake. By the way, your high capacity leaders, when you restructure, are excited about it. The people who are nervous about a restructure, you probably should assess a little bit why they feel that way, because something might not be running right. Another mistake is that they tip some dominoes before they've really thought through the restructure.
Mm.
I'm really clear with the churches when we go on site for a staffing and structure review that we are in the slow time. Our cards are close right now because just like when we did planning with you guys, Mark, we started with the assessment. Where are we healthy? Where are we, not healthy? Where are we stuck? So this is our starting line. Then we talk through where are we going, and then we, structured around that. Staffing and structure in and of itself has a little bit of that same piece. We should start by assessing and actually get a small team together to talk through what's right about how we're structured right now, what's right about our staffing, and then what feels stuck. Are we missing anything, missing any roles? Is there anything that's confusing? Assess the people. Like I said, we use DISC, character chemistry competence, leadership capacity. So you want to do some of that pre work. and then start dreaming about what the structure could look like and spending some time on that. Once you've made the decision, I would give yourself a couple of weeks to sit with it and pray about it and process it, because we're not talking ministry now, we're actually talking people. And I think you need to gain peace, you need to understand if you can afford it, and then you need to, once you have that peace, then you need to start to think through the full communication plan. So there's a lot of steps to do a restructure well, and to even have some fun with it. But if we start tipping dominoes or having conversations out of order, it can really create a lot of anxiety, and things can go wrong when that's there. So giving the right space. Sometimes I really, I think it can be a mistake to just do it internally. It's helpful to get some fresh eyes and
Yeah,
perspective on your church and your team. So obviously I do this for a living, but I would recommend getting somehow
yeah,
some fresh eyes, because you know this, Mark. When we work in ministry with people, they're kind of family, and we can miss some things that, or maybe we know it, but we don't want to lean into it. So,
yeah,
and the other mistake, and it's probably woven in there, is just trying to keep everybody happy through the restructure. It's just like church. It's not possible to keep everybody happy, but you in your seat and these leaders in the room, these are only changes that you all can make. The staff down below who are high performers, they want you to make some of these changes,
yeah,
because they can't. So, just know that there's usually some loss. And the encouragement I would give you is also that as you pray about restructuring your staff, I see it all the time, knowing that God is with you. He's with you during the assessment time. He's with you during the work time where you're planning it, and he's going to follow you. I had to say 3 out of 4 times something that was going to be really uncomfortable coming out of a structure recommendation. The Lord, in a sense, took care of it in a
mm,
positive way. So and so got a new job. I thought of this volunteer who could step into that role. So, you know, prayerful, thoughtful, um, and then obviously, think through your communication plans so that who do I have the conversation with first? um who do I have the next conversation with? Because once you start tipping
yeah.
dominoes, we are in the fast part, and you want to get through it as quickly as possible, because everything's going to leak anyways. But there are some conversations you want to have first, and there's some conversations you want to have last.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciated about working with Unstuck was the thoroughness of that part of the process. And it is true that when you work with people, and it was especially true in my case, we had some very long-term staff members who were not just employees, they were friends. I mean, we would literally vacation together. So it was hard
Yep.
for me to be objective. But it was easier for someone to come in from the outside, do some giftedness and personality testing, look at things on paper, and
Hmm.
help me to make. I think sometimes deep down inside, I knew what decisions had to be made, but I
Yep.
needed that confirmation and some objectivity along with it. So that was very helpful. And I would encourage,
Yep.
our churches to do the same thing in some way, shape, or form, get some outside eyes on it. You talk oftentimes about a leadership team. So would the
Hmm.
leadership team be the people who are at the top of the org chart, uh, and therefore working with the senior pastor to give direction? How big should that team be, and who should
Hmm.
be on it?
It's a great question. So let me answer it a little bit different way. The first thing I want to say is, when I restructure a team or work with a church, one of the key things I'm trying to do is get the lead pastor in his or her lane. In other words, we talk about it at Unstuck, the four things that a senior pastor can't delegate. That's what we want to carve out time for. So it's being the spiritual leader of the church, which is primarily done through teaching and leading the teaching team. They need to be the primary vision caster. They need to um oh, that's really funny. What's the word I'm looking for? Vision. I said vision caster. Culture. There it is.
Culture?
Be the primary culture bearer for the church, and then be engaged with the senior leadership team. So that's where we want the pastor spending their time. We can pass to the executive pastor or key staff pretty much everything else, but we want to make sure through the restructure that the lead pastor gets into that spot where they can be doing what only they can do. Underneath, when we start talking about clear ministry lanes, how my basic starting point with the church until I get to know them is, I'm thinking we need someone in a role over operations. We need someone in a role over those reach strategies like the weekend and digital. We need a leader over the discipleship steps. I often call it the next steps, but that's group serving, all of that. And then we need a leader over family ministries because most of the churches we work with are trying to reach that next generation. So if I just use those four roles for an example, for a starting point, if it's a larger church, you're going to have an executive pastor that those four would report into, and then you'd have a lead pastor. So now we have six leaders in the mix, right? So your question was, would that be the senior leadership team? Yes and no. So, yes, from the sense of if they are all very strategic, and they should be if they're going to be in these roles, if they are strategic thinkers and they're able to take off their functional hat, like I'm discipleship, put it down and talk about ministry across the board, that's where I would start to build my senior leadership team. Now, sometimes you have an operations director who's a phenomenal operations director, but they really aren't someone who wants to be in strategic conversations.
Yeah.
So they can still be a direct report to the executive pastor, but they don't have to be on the senior leadership team. In fact, you'd probably invite them once a month to run through the numbers and, answer questions, that type of thing. Or you might hire a brand new family ministries director. I wouldn't start that person on the senior leadership team if they're new to your staff. It's the destination we want them to get to, but you want them to get into their role, get to know the culture, make sure it's a good fit type of thing. And the last thing I'd say is sometimes there's someone deeper in the organization that's very strategic and you want them on the team. I'm encouraging pastors all the time, especially if the team is lacking some diversity, whether that be age, whether that be gender, whatever it is. Sometimes dip into the organization and get some other younger leaders around that table will really help that team be effective. So it's not a rule that they have to be direct reports at the top, but you just want the best strategic leaders on your team. I think the ideal size is probably somewhere in that 4 to 6 range, no more than 8. When it gets past 8, it's too big of a team. It's too bloated and it needs to be. But you can invite other staff members to that meeting to participate in certain discussions. You can have them come and present. At multi-site churches, regularly campus pastors are coming in to present on the health of their campuses type of thing. But that core team probably somewhere in the 4 to 6 range.
Yeah. Good. Good. So these churches, if they choose to restructure, will go through the process slowly, but then get to the fast part. So
Hmm.
sometimes those conversations are difficult if there's a perceived loss of influence or someone isn't around the table for all the meetings that they used to be around the
Hmm.
table for. What
Yeah.
advice would you give these church leaders on how to communicate these changes in staff roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, those are hard conversations. And man, people have written books about some of these crucial conversations. So,
Yeah,
one, I would say, do your time if you're uncomfortable with it. But first off, you have to be in the right frame of mind. I mean, what we owe our people is to be clear and kind. And
yeah,
depending on our wiring, like for my wiring, I'm more of a people person. I have to work to be clear because I will always be kind. People on the more task mission side of the disc wheel, they're going to be clear, but they might miss some of the warmth. But we need to be both clear and kind. And um, the talk track really starts with why are we restructuring, with each person. Here's where we are and why we're stuck in these areas. Here's why we're going through the restructure. I even sometimes will just lay out the org chart with just the responsibilities on it, not even the names, and to kind of walk through. And what we did here was we cleared up the ministry lanes, and then this is the role that we would like to move you into, type of thing, and to build them up. And here's why. And then as they have questions, I mean, you'll be able to predict some of them. This is not a senior leadership team role, but we're going to want your voice on things once in a while, and through an invite, we'll bring you to that. And I don't know, it's not. There's no silver bullet with it,
yeah,
other than to have. That's why that worked during the slow time, to even as a small team who understands a restructure, to brainstorm together, because there's uniquenesses in every person. There are some people who are like, just tell me. And
yeah,
there's other people who are going to be joyful, and other people, the tough ones is if they don't have a job anymore. Of course, you want to consult legal counsel on that. But if
mhm,
there is a demotion or a loss of influence, you know, you probably want to have someone who's known that person for a while be part of the team to talk through it. Like I like to have two leaders in the room when we're communicating restructure. One, it protects you, also gives someone a chance to listen while one of you is talking and vice versa. So
Yeah.
hopefully those are a couple of ideas for you.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, Amy, I
Mhm.
appreciate your time very much. This has been very, very helpful to our folks who are here at the workshop today. And to all the people who are part of the workshop, if you're not familiar with the Unstuck Group, I would encourage you to check out their website, listen to their podcast. A lot of great resources online that are offered there for free. And maybe
Mhm.
even if you're at the point where you feel like you need some in-depth help, just invite them to consult with you on the ground in your church. And one thing I appreciate so much, Amy, about the Unstuck Group is just that your material, your podcast, all of that is very, very everyday practical stuff for church leaders. So it's very helpful. But thanks for giving of
Great.
your time here to our group that's here at the workshop. And we'll be in touch again soon.
That sounds good. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.